welcome to Optimize Your Body with Martin Silva, where we talk raw, uncut facts to truly help you optimize your body. Hey guys and girls, welcome to the show. I'm doing a solo episode today. I haven't got my partner in crime, Andrew Baum, with me. However, I am currently looking out of my hotel room window in beautiful Bali. That's right, I'm on holiday. But as I say, it's not going to hurt me to get a little podcast in the bag, keep you guys in the loop. Okay, so I'm just going to be going straight into a question I had from one of the listeners. Okay, now feel free to DM me on Instagram at Martin Silva Fitness if you have any questions for me to address, for us to address here. It's from Jamie_L_ on Instagram, and she was asking about fasted training. Now, as a lot of you may know, generally I train on an empty stomach, and I generally don't like to eat. If I do eat before training, I give it at least 3 hours before. And I would say for most people, that is going to be the best option. Because remember, the food is not really going to even start hitting your gut for like 1 to 3 hours, give or take, before you even start breaking the food down. So, you don't want to be, like I said, the majority of the time, if you're going to be training and you've eaten within, say, 3 hours, your body is trying to break that food down as you're training. So it's just not ideal for most people. Based on my experience, having trained over 1,000 people as well, most of my clients tend to train and function better in the gym when they haven't eaten before. So, okay, the first thing is, when you train in a fasted state, are you going to burn more fat? So let's relate it to fat burning, because I know a lot of the audience want to find out more about that and how they can, optimize the fat burning when it comes to losing body fat and getting leaner. Are you going to burn more fat in a fasted state? So let's just say, if you're listening to this, I'm just going to assume you train first thing in the morning first, okay? You get up in the morning, you train, you've had a meal the night before. Basically, your body is going to be utilizing the calories you've eaten the night before. And let's just say, give or take, whatever you've eaten within the last 24 hours is what your body is going to be utilizing as an energy source in the gym, okay? So if you're training on an empty stomach, are you going to burn more fat, okay? It just depends, really. It depends. Now, I'm gonna use lifting weights as the example. Now, if you're lifting weights, generally, you're going to feel better because your body's not breaking down food. If you're training first thing in the morning, you're in a fasted state, your body's going to be using the energy or the calories you had from the day before anyway. Are you going to burn more fat? Is kind of splitting hairs, really. It just depends on the kind of food you've eaten as well. So without going too much into that, right, you're going to have plenty of energy. Generally, you're going to feel better, okay, for the most part. And are you going to draw more fat out of the cells? If you've had a meal which is higher in fat the night before, then you're most likely to burn a bit more fat, really. If you've had a meal which is heavy in carbohydrates, if you're lifting really heavy weights, it might benefit your strength if you throw some carbohydrates in the night before. But if your goal is predominantly to burn fat, then you'll probably feel better if you just don't even have many carbs the night before. So you have a meal which is high in fat, some red meat, some avocado, lots of vegetables, maybe some nuts, olive oil, those kind of foods, quite high in fats. And your body then is going to generally maybe burn a little bit more fat when you're training, because it doesn't have to go through the carbohydrates you've stored in the muscles before it starts eating at your fat, if that makes sense, right? But this is all splitting hairs, okay? But the main thing is, a lot of people think, if I don't eat before training, I'm not going to have as much energy. But generally, you're probably going to have more energy. As long as you've had enough calories and decent nutrient-dense foods prior to that within the last 24 hours, generally you're going to be totally fine, and you'll probably have more energy, okay? Because your body doesn't have to worry about digesting the food. So when it comes to burning fat, there's a lot of variables, and it's kind of splitting hairs, right? But yeah, that's training. That example was training first thing in the morning, right? Let's just jump to, if you're training in the evening, you have to train after work, you finish work at 5, you get to the gym at 6:30 p.m. Should I eat before training? I get that question a lot. Now, once again, personally for me and for most people I've trained, I always recommend to give it at least 3 hours, okay, at a minimum of 3 hours. Before, give it a gap of at least 3 hours before you train, okay. What I'm trying to say is, if you eat, give it at least 3 hours until you train, right? Because, as I said, the whole digestion thing, it uses up a lot of energy when your body has to try and pump blood into your gut to break down food. So if you're going to train at, say, 6 p.m., personally, I would recommend having a really decent meal at lunchtime, okay? If you're lifting heavy weights, you might want to throw some carbs in there because, it benefits some people, and including myself. Sometimes I find if I load the carbs in, I'm stronger sometimes if I'm lifting really heavy weights and I'm going hard and heavy. So you might want to throw some carbohydrates into that meal, some sweet potato, some quinoa, some rice or whatever. But yeah, give it a decent gap before you lift the weights, because generally you're going to feel a lot better. Let's just talk about like fasted cardio now, okay? Because a lot of people ask me, if I do my cardio in a fasted state in the morning, will I burn more fat? You do generally burn, if you're doing cardio on an empty stomach, okay, and you haven't eaten before, generally you're going to draw more fat out of the cells, okay? But again, this is kind of splitting hairs. It's not really going to make a massive deal of difference in the grand scheme of things. But if you can get up in the morning, I find it just becomes more handy. It just molds more into my routine and most people's routine. If they just get up in the morning, headphones on or whatever, do what you got to do cardio-wise, empty stomach, first thing in the morning. Yes, you may burn a little bit more fat, but it's not really going to make that much difference. However, you feel good afterwards. You've got it out the way, and let's just say you're just going to do a walk on the treadmill, a fast walk. You've already racked up. Let's just say you've done a half-hour walk, and for argument's sake, you've racked up like an extra 4,000 or 5,000 steps in your day. So that's already boom. And then if you look at the compound effect, then you've got up early, you've racked your steps up, and over the space of a week, then your overall calorie expenditure has gone through the roof, and that's by like 7, 8 a.m. in the morning. So I find for a lot of people, getting out of the way just becomes more productive long term in terms of overall calorie expenditure and fat burning. Now, most people I've trained, as I've said, do tend to respond better when they train on an empty stomach. Let's just use lifting weights as an example. Now, I've experimented with this recently myself, because I always used to think, if I don't load the carbs in prior to training, even if it's on that day, well before I've trained, if I haven't loaded the carbs in, I'm not going to be strong enough. Now, for the most part, even if I don't have a carb-heavy meal, and I just have a meal which is, dense in protein and fats, such as a big heavy omelette with loads of greens, as long as I've had a decent high-calorie meal, it doesn't really make any difference. And if anything, I sometimes feel better when I train after having a low-carb meal in the daytime. So, yeah, really, I wouldn't think too much into it when it comes to what exactly should I eat before training, right? But what I would do is just try and give your body enough time to digest the food. Okay, so give yourself, as I said, at least 3 hours before, at least a 3 hour gap before you lift weights, okay? And if you are going hard and heavy and your goal is to build muscle and increase your strength, then a lot of the time it might be an idea to load some carbohydrates in. Personally, I think it may be a psychological thing for me, but I like to have, let's just say the night before, because I always train, most of the time I train fasted in the late mornings. So I'll have a meal, let's just say 7 p.m. the night before. Sometimes I won't train till about 11 a.m. the next day. So that's like 16 hours into a fast. And I feel great normally. Even if, so what I was going to say is it's a psychological thing for me, I think, to load the carbs in the night before if I'm doing strength training. So I tend to feel better, but I don't know whether it is placebo, psychological, or whether it is a physical thing. But I load the carbs the night before when I do strength training. So, mention the foods I mentioned earlier. Sorry, including the foods I mentioned earlier. I'll normally have like a load of rice or potato within the meal, and then maybe some fruit or something afterwards for dessert with some yogurt or something the night before. So it's quite a heavy, high-calorie meal. And then that's loaded into my muscles then, and boom, 16 hours later, I have a coffee before, and that's always having a coffee prior to training has been proven to, all in all, to increase performance by about 12%. So, normally on an empty stomach and a bit of caffeine for me, a bit of caffeine for me prior to training is the sweet spot, okay? So I normally feel strong as an ox on an empty stomach with a bit of caffeine. So, and I get the same with clients as well. Now, if you don't have much caffeine or coffee, it's totally fine. You don't need to start doing anything drastic. But I guess the key takeaway for this podcast is when it comes to training fasted, if your goal is to lose fat, okay, then firstly, so even if you haven't had any carbohydrates, the body's going to store a little bit anyway. So when you lift the weights, then generally you're going to deplete the glycogen. So your body's going to utilize that glycogen as energy. And then when you do your cardio afterwards, you're going to be in your fat burning zone because your body then is chewing away at your body fat. So lift the weights and do cardio after that. If you train first thing in the morning, if your goal is to burn fat. And then another trick is I always say to people then, if you can drag your fast out after training, your body is going to be burning fat, okay? Your body's going to be utilizing your fat stores. No, you're not going to lose any muscle. I'm not even going to go into that, but don't worry about losing muscle. That's not going to happen. Your body's just going to be burning fat. So when I'm leading up to shows and photo shoots, I drag my fast out after training as long as possible. Now, that might be a bit extreme for some people, especially if you're doing weights followed by cardio. Don't do anything too drastic, but just remember, if you do the cardio after weights, your body's going to be in your prime fat burning zone. If you train in the evenings, okay, like I said, I would give yourself a big gap in between training. And if you do have caffeine, have a little caffeine at least 20 minutes before, because that takes 20 minutes to get into your system. And have a decent meal at lunchtime and don't eat before training, I would say. And then obviously have your post-training meal after that. It's as simple as that, really. If your goal is to build muscle and increase strength, you can still do the same thing. You can still do that. You can still train in the fastest state like I do. Currently, my goal is to build muscle. I'm in a bulking phase, and it's great because I'm eating everything in sight. However, I still train towards the end of a fast for the most part. I'm going to go and train now. I had my meal at like 8 p.m. last night. It's now 10 a.m. I'm going to go and train, and I'll feel great. And once you get used to that, most people do feel really good. So even if your goal is to build strength and build muscle, if you train in the mornings, then don't bother eating in the morning. Get your session in and eat after. And if your goal is to build muscle and strength and you train in the evenings or later in the day, the same thing applies. Make sure you load plenty of calories in though, right? So you've got to get your calories in. Generally, if your goal is to build strength and muscle, you want to be in a little bit of a calorie surplus. So you want to be eating slightly more calories than what you're burning. So I would say, once again, load the calories in. So if you're training in the evening, make sure you get plenty of food in, but give it at least generally a 3-hour gap between eating and training. And for the 90% of the time, 95% of the time, you're going to feel much better doing it that way. Also, everything I've been talking about there is really intermittent fasting. So obviously I'm saying that I train 12 to 16 hours after eating, essentially, because I train the next morning, late in the morning, and I'm eating my evening meal the night before. So I'm training a lot of the time 12 to 16 hours into a fast. So, that is basically a form of fasting. Yeah, it's intermittent fasting. Even if you go 12 hours without food, you stop eating at 8 p.m. and you train at 8 a.m. or 7 or 8 a.m. And then you eat after that, you're still technically doing intermittent fasting, even whether you realize it or not. So we have a great episode on that. It is episode 55, about 4 episodes back. So go and check that out if you want to find out more about intermittent fasting. And also the third episode we did, one of the early episodes, was part 1 of intermittent fasting. So go and check that out. Last thing to bear in mind as well is we don't need carbohydrates. Humans do not need carbohydrates to survive, okay? Protein and fats are essential macronutrients, whereas carbohydrates are not. We have tens of thousands of calories of fat stored within our bodies to keep us alive if we were to be dumped on a desert island, right? So you have so many calories of fat to be utilized as energy in the gym, and generally most people perform much better from using fat as an energy source, unless you're an athlete and you're doing elite, style training where you're doing power movements. And, if you are doing strength training as well, carbohydrates do come in handy if you're looking to make gains with your strength and, sometimes just for building muscle. But everyone's different. There's lots of variables. Generally, you'll function perfectly fine off, either fasting or eating a high-fat meal and having caffeine before training. Anyway, folks, I hope that I dropped decent knowledge bombs there for you, and you can get some good takeaways from that in terms of fasted training. And I'd like to mention our new website, optimizeyourbody.com, is going to be dropping this month or next month. I know we keep delaying it, but we're putting a lot of content in there. It's taking us a bit longer than usual. Instagram, don't forget to go follow me on there if you're not already, at Martin Silva Fitness. And head over to my current website if you want some free. I have a free training program on there. I have some free recipe ebooks. So go over to my current website, which is martin-silva.co.uk. Enter your email address into the pop-up box and get your freebies. Thanks for listening, folks. Catch you soon.